If you work with children who are minimally speaking, who are using low tech or high tech AAC devices, this episode is for you. We are going to dive into the latest systematic review that just came out this spring on using AAC devices for social communication, for commenting. What can we use on Monday morning? More importantly, we're going to look at the entire evidence-based practice triangle. One part of the triangle when it comes to evidence-based practice is the published research, which is very sparse. We're going to have to rely on our clinical expertise. In addition to that, we're going to look at the individual child and how that's going to change what we're going to do. You simply cannot follow a flow chart when you're working with high-tech AAC devices or even low-tech AAC devices when you're working with children with complex communication needs. They present with a complex profile, and you're going to have to do something different, DSD, depending on the child you're working with. This triangle of evidence-based practice, if there's any time that you need to look at all three angles, it's when you're working with children with complex communication needs in AAC. That's what we're going to do today. It's going to be messy. It's going to be gritty. If you're ready to dig in, you're going to roll up your sleeves, grab your shovel. We're going to have to sift through a lot of garbage. We're getting our recycle bin out again. We're going to look at that research that we have available, which isn't very good. And we're going to, on Monday morning, DSD, do something different so that we can improve outcomes. Because frankly, we don't have a plan. We don't have an evidence-based approach that you can put into practice on Monday morning. There is no do this tomorrow and you're going to be fine. We don't have that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to be scrappy. We're going to get out the recycle bin. We're going to look at what's available, and we're going to look at it with a caveat emptor eyes. When you're consuming this research, you have to be very critical of what you read. We have an article here by Trina Spencer, who of course I've spoken about a lot because I think that her work in literacy intervention and how she's improving language outcomes through using storytelling, story retelling, elements of the story. This has been really game-changing for our field. I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Spencer. She's at a University of Kansas currently. I email her often for her advisement when it comes to narratives and language comprehension games and language expression games. She has been so generous with her time and talent. She is definitely a force in the field that has really created great change. She's definitely someone that has embraced the complexity approach. She is using complex targets. She is using narratives, children expressing narratives, not just children that are elementary age. We're talking children who are preschool age. We're talking children who are in Head Start programs. We're talking about children who are English language learners. We're talking about children with cognitive delays, children with autism. And what she showed is that all children are capable of complex targets when we give them multimodal cues, when we provide them with scaffolds, when we ask the question, how can this child perform this task, and not if the child can perform this task. So I have a great deal of respect for the first author, Trina Spencer. Let's look at this article from March 2025. I have a couple of issues with the article I'm just going to point out right now. And the first thing is saying you're promoting commenting. Now, when I look at commenting, I think of commenting as something that is spontaneous and something that is initiated. And when I look at the 14 studies that were reviewed in this article, they have a lot of storybook interventions in which the child is asked a question about the story, and the child's response is referred to as a comment. Now, that to me is answering a fact-based question. That is dependent on prompts. That is not a comment in my books. This is just something that I look at and I say, is this really a commenting intervention, or is this an intervention that increases children's response to mixed WH questions in the context of storytelling? They're different. Commenting is not prompted. Responding to questions is prompted. And many of the children we work with are prompt dependent. Initiations is something we would prefer in the form of commenting. It's very, very powerful. It's the golden apple. When we see children at the toddler age that are commenting, that are spontaneously making comments about the activity or the object at hand toward another person, this is the golden apple, which says this child has a great prognosis for communication development. It's much more valuable than requests are. Commenting is so important. And that's why instead of using an I want sentence strip, I use the look at sentence strip. This simple change that I've made, instead of using I want, when the children do develop speech, what I notice is they're pointing and they're saying, look, look, look. And they're pointing out the trees outside and the cars outside. And they're pointing at the pictures on the wall. The language, as William LeBeau had put in, is a container of thought. And simply by having the children read the word look at instead of I want, it developed them into commenters when they developed speech. I noticed a huge difference. This is not based on peer-reviewed research. This is my clinical expertise, but this is going to play a huge role in what we're going to do on Monday morning, because as we dive into the research, it's a recycle bin. We're digging through the trash. We're trying to find something to piece together. Once again, we're going to try to make some kind of homemade card and call it a gift. That's the way I look at this research. We're looking at these studies and we're calling it commenting. Maybe you are using communication for social purposes because you're answering fact-based questions, but that's not commenting. Okay, that's responding to a prompt. But when we dive into this research, I want to look at what we can use on Monday morning. The studies are primarily 3 children. There's some studies with 2 children involved, some studies with 3 children, and there's a couple studies with 4. So on average, you're looking at 14 studies with 3 children who are using augmentative communication. So with these children, a lot of them are already combining words. Now that is a really pivotal period when children are combining words, because other studies have found that when children begin to combine words, for instance, in the PECS program at the sentence strip level, that's when you see the greatest emergence of speech. This is a really pivotal time, and Trina Spencer talks about this as being something when you're on the cusp of something, when you're able to combine words, because suddenly you're able to use language more generatively to express yourself. It's a real big moment where the single words become word combinations. Now, that said, when we look at these studies, another thing I don't like about these studies reviewed is they threw in a study of 2 children that were, I think, ages 16 and 17 years old. And I consider that kind of an outlier group because the rest of the studies are primarily young elementary and preschool age. And the study they threw in that had 2 children, they weren't doing a shared storybook activity. They were playing the game Trouble. And I don't know if you know the game Trouble, but it's a really boring board game. It's kind of like Sorry. I believe it's the one you press the bubble down and the dice roll. It's boring. It's important the activity is meaningful if you're going to see gains. We can't forget that. I really wish that study wasn't included because you can't draw conclusions based on something that a 16 or 17-year-old does in comparing it to the way a preschool and elementary group children would learn. When we're looking at this study, we can take this and use this on Monday morning. There's other research studies that support that this works as well. And then one is modeling. So they call it aided modeling, which sounds so fancy. It simply means you're modeling on their device, on their core board, on their sentence strip, what you'd like them to do. Aided modeling, it sounds high tech. Basically, you're showing them this is how you do it. So modeling works. Is it highly effective 100% of the time? No, but it works. What they found in the study is that if you combined modeling with other prompting strategies, then you would have more efficacy. Now, when I say you're going to have more efficacy, instead of 2 out of the 4 children benefiting from the approach, you had 3 out of 4 children benefiting from the approach. The study, can't say this with certainty because this is a dearth of research available, supports a least to most prompting hierarchy. Now, the reason I say you cannot make that statement, and they say we can't make this statement with certainty because of the quality of these studies, is that included in this review were not most to least prompting hierarchies. Now, when I'm talking about most to least prompting hierarchies, you never have to touch the child, but you could be pointing to where the picture is as a most prompt, right? And then after that, you could tell them where to do it. And then after that, you could model it last. So you could use, I'm using the most intrusive prompt first, and it doesn't involve touching you, but it's a lot of prompting. I'm front loading really heavy on you. And then I'm going to pull back, and then I'm just going to do modeling, right? That study, because these studies are not included in this systematic review, you can't make the statement, because you're not comparing apples to apples, that the least prompting to most prompting method is most effective. There was no most to least promptings included in this study. This is a really important point to make. We know other approaches, such as the picture exchange communication system, uses a most to least prompting strategy. And it is one of the most, if not the most researched approach. It's not that I'm supporting the picture exchange communication system. It's that I'm saying we can't make the statement that a least to most prompting hierarchy strategy is recommended when you haven't compared it to a most to least prompting hierarchy strategy. And that's one of those things that I think it is an important point to make, because we know that the picture exchange communication system, which was not included in the study, does have a robust evidence base. Now, am I for hand over hand? No, I'm not for hand over hand. And I've done it for years when I started off doing the picture exchange communication system. And what I found is that you can have a child that you're doing hand over hand with for all through preschool if you follow the picture exchange communication system. And I'm not putting them down. We're all rowing the same direction. And there's a prompt dependency in which you're doing the child's push-ups for them. You're doing the ideation, motor planning, motor programming. You're doing the execution, and the child is passively along for the ride. I've been there, I've done that. If you are doing any sorts of touch prompts, you got to get rid of as soon as possible. It's just like I say when you're doing speech sound disorder therapy, you got to get rid of the speech prompt as soon as possible. When you're doing the speech prompt, you're doing the ideation, you're doing the motor planning, you're doing the motor programming and execution. You got to get rid of it. You can't do their push-ups for them. The same can be said about the physical prompt. Get rid of the physical prompt if you're doing any physical prompting whatsoever. There are situations in which I have used physical prompt because I've seen that a child, for instance, wants bubbles, and their visual motor coordination is such that they're kind of 2 inches off to the left, or they're 2 inches up too high, or they're 2 inches too low, and they're trying to hit that. I might give them a slight little under the hand touch to get them right over that button of bubbles that they really want, that they've made it clear they want the bubbles. I mean, they're like jumping over me for those bubbles. And then they press the bubbles. And what that does, it calibrates their motor planning and their motor programming, their execution, so that they realize when I go 2 inches over to the right, I get on the bubbles and I get the bubbles. And then I can quickly move my hand away. But there's something, because of the neurological differences, in which they're 2 inches off in the way of their visual motor programming is working. We know that is an issue for many of our children with autism, with visual motor integration. That's just an example of it. If you just kind of let them know this is where it is, then they can get that feeling and they can get that positive practice going, and then they can independently do it. And of course, you get your hands off of them as soon as possible. And if we're putting our hands on the child, that's always as a last resort. But like I'm saying, when we're looking at this triangle of evidence-based practice, we have the research, and I'm showing you here the research, and the research is scant. We have research on 2 children over here and research on 3 children over here. Big study is 4 children, right? This isn't group design. This is just looking at the child over time. Aside from the research being scant, we need to look at our clinical expertise. If I use look at instead of the I want sentence strip, I've noticed a difference at the earliest levels in commenting. Or I've told you from my clinical expertise, if I have my hand doing hand over hand on the child in the PECS protocol, I will find myself through the preschool years doing hand over hand on a child in which the child develops a prompt dependency, and I'm doing the ideation and the motor planning and the programming, the execution, and the child is passively along for the ride. I'm learning from my mistakes and my clinical expertise. But when we look at the evidence-based practice and the individual child as being the other angle of the triangle, we have to look at children that have visual cortical areas of difficulty, for instance, or motor areas of difficulty. And for them, they may require a little bit of tactile input. And I like to do that under, not over, under the child. So the child is seeing their hand, and I also like to do it, it's just a positioning prompt so that I'm setting the child up for success. So the child is not frustrated, in which they're trying to go for the bubbles and they're only successful 5% of the time because of visual cortical issues. Either looking at the individual child and how you're going to DSD, you're going to do something different for the individual child. You're looking at your clinical expertise, you're like, oh, I've done that before, I'm not going to do that again. That doesn't work. You're going, or you look at the look at sentence strip, I've done this before, this really does work. I'm going to stick with this. It's an ongoing, and we're going to look at the research. What does the research have for us to integrate into practice? So what we know from this study is we know that modeling is effective. We can take that and we can say, okay, we're going to stick with that. We know also when you combine modeling with leveled cueing, like scaffolding, you get a little bit more efficacy. Am I going to say it's at least to most or most to least? No, we can't make that statement. But we could say, okay, we saw in these small case studies of a couple kiddos that when you combined it with some form of leveled cueing, you're going to improve your efficacy. Maybe instead of 2 children benefiting, you're going to get 3. That's what we're talking about here. We're really splitting hairs in this recycling bag. We're digging and digging and digging because this is all we got, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that. So I'm going to think about cueing. And then I'm also going to take with this the importance of combining words. When it comes to combining words, what this study is finding and what other studies are finding is that this is a pivotal moment when you're combining words in which it's often accompanied by an increase in speech development, and it's accompanied by a dramatic increase in your ability to express yourself. So now that you're able to combine words, you're able to communicate in a more generative fashion. Now, I wanted to tell you something really cool that I'm finding with my kids with autism. My kids with autism, they're my real professors. I'm going to University of Florida. I've got professors there, but the real professors are the preschoolers with autism at work. They school me like no one else. And I wanted to share with you how they're schooling me today because I think you'll find it fascinating and what's going on in my back porch. I'm using these robust 6,000 word devices for these kiddos. And now they're starting to string the words together independently and create sentences. What I'm finding is a pattern in how many of my kiddos are creating sentences. And it's very pragmatic based. So they'll start with a sentence. So we're doing one of our reading activities, Pete the cat, right? And they'll put, reading. And then after the reading, they'll put the object, book. And then after the book, they'll put their name, type it in. And then they'll type a feeling, happy. And it's just really neat when I'm seeing this with all of the students. They're starting with the verbs, and then they're going with the object. And then after that, they're going with who. And then the last thing is a feeling. And it just seems like practically the verb is what matters. We're going to do this. You know what we're going to do. We have the objects already out here. But here's the object. And then this is the person it's affected. And then they type in their name. And then they'll type a feeling in at the end. So I'm seeing, so far, I'm looking at 4 different kiddos that are developing this independently, combining words and creating these sentences. And they're all following this really cool pattern. I think how great that I don't have scripts. When I first started using speech generated devices, I would take play and I would turn it into let's play. I would take eat and turn it into let's eat. It kind of turned it into these phrases. I want that instead of I want. But there's a price that you're paying if you do that to your words. And the price you're paying is that takes away their ability to independently combine the words to generate their own ideas. So I see the benefit of the words being available in a singleton fashion so that they can manipulate that and get their ideas across. And it seems as if they're getting their ideas across to me in level of importance, the way that they're putting their words together, but their sentences together. I find it fascinating. In the last 22 years of doing this, I've had the greatest gains when I pay attention to the children with autism and the way their speech develops. And I pay attention to the way their language develops. And when you pay attention to them, you're going to see what happens from the children who are minimally speaking to those who become fluent speakers. You're going to see how they cross that bridge. And that's when you really want to take notes. They're going to let you know these are the obstacles for me, these are the challenges, and this is how I overcome them. And if you can just make that map, this is what they did, then you can help the next child cross that bridge. It's very exciting stuff. But that is something I wonder, you should email me if that's what you're seeing on your back porch now that you're giving access to thousands of words to children. How are they creating their senses? Are you finding what I'm finding, which is the most pragmatically important word comes first, and then it decreases in the pragmatism as the sentence goes on? It's pretty exciting stuff. Back to the research. So this is what we have from the study, and I'm very appreciative to Trina Spencer and her colleagues for giving us this important information, because as speech language pathologists, we're told we should focus on social communication with AAC, but there's a lag. We're not given the research. So how do you do that? We're not given a protocol. We're just given the expectation, right? So it's really nice that she published this. And this is an open access article. So that means anyone can get this for free. And I'm going to make sure to cite it in this episode. What I do have for you is I have my model approach. So the model approach is something that works for everyone. You're not going to ruin children doing this approach. Every parent should benefit from this approach. And the model approach is to model, which is to show this is how you do it. And then the next one is to offer. So you model it. And as I say in the video that you're going to see, you can download the video. When you model it, you don't do it one time. You do it again and again and again in the context of meaningful activities. You do it 10 times, and then you pause. And then the O stands for offer. You offer them the opportunity to take a turn at it. And then after that, we have the D. The D is within 3 to 5 seconds. For some, it would be within 1 second. For some, it would be within 10 seconds. You're going to do something different with each child. You're going to go ahead and demonstrate it if they don't do it. And then the E, this is where you're going to elaborate. So you're going to take whatever you modeled, you're going to add a couple words to it. You're going to model the grammar. You're going to model the elaboration. And then when you look at the L, that's like. That's where you just make a comment. So you might say, awesome, cool, I like that, that's funny. That's where you simply make a comment. You're modeling commenting. You're modeling elaborate syntax. You're doing all of the right things, and you're not going to hurt any child in the process. This is simply 101 responsive, educationally rich intervention that every child benefits from. This is not going to hurt any child. This is only going to help children. We, of course, have so much to learn when it comes to how are we going to scaffold? Is there a scaffolding technique that should change depending on the child? For instance, for myself, some children I work with are music children. In our sessions, I look more like a music therapist than I do a speech therapist, and I'm tone deaf, so it's like a really bad sight. I'm glad you don't have to see that, but it works. And then for some children, it looks like I'm a literacy teacher because I'm all about in the letters and the print because that's what works for them. Every child is different. Some children, it's all like gestures all over the place and dancing all over the place because they're like me, they're kinesthetic learners. They learn through movement. So I'm always going to do something different with each of the children. What we need to kind of think about is what are going to be those prompting strategies that we use and when and in what order and with who. And I really think that's going to be something that's going to change depending on the individual child. I'm very uncomfortable with recommending a least to most prompting strategy across the board for children with complex communication needs. We simply do not have the research, unique superpowers, and a lot of unique weaknesses requires you to do something different. And the least to most prompting hierarchy strategy, I think, could result in a lot of frustration, a lot of negative practice, a lot of poor motor planning, poor motor programming. So that doesn't mean put your hands on the child, but that means that you're going to manipulate the environment. Perhaps you're going to, with this complex device, you're going to have some symbols hidden so that the child can develop accurate motor planning and accurate motor programming and accurate execution, and then quickly pop them up. If you look at Google, your search engine in Google, you just got a bar right there in the middle, right? How brilliant is that? Not all of that visual distraction. That really does help you focus in. Boom. If you're looking at ChatGPT today, you're going to be like, oh, ChatGPT is looking like a lot like Google. They could put a lot of stuff on that page. They don't. They just have the search bar in the middle. There's something to be said about getting the child's attention, getting your attention. We just have to think about how we can do something different to best meet the needs of every individual child that we're working with. All right, that said, I want you to do what you do best, which is to roll up your sleeves and make the world a better place, one child at a time. You are always going to be